Stalin is dead. Under his rule, the Soviet Union has risen from a post-feudal agricultural state to a militarist industrial juggernaut that is now one of the two atomic superpowers that dominate the globe. Along the way, he has assumed totalitarian power, with an iron fist squeezing out the lifeblood of millions of his subjects to forge the new Soviet Union, a state that lives in terror of its leader. His demise leaves a power vacuum, with his minions now eagerly eyeing the throne. Welcome to Season 1 of TimeGhost Cold War coverage in our series War to War, where we cover the events of a decade after World War II that brought man from the brink of destruction to the threshold of the stars. I am Sebastian Brandstetter. On the morning of March 5th, 1953, an official announcement by Moscow radio marks the end of 3 decades of Joseph Stalin's absolute rule. Already in his final 2 months, a Game of Thrones has begun. In the last 2 years of Stalin's life, changes in his behavior are evident. Ever paranoid, but always deliberate, his paranoia reaches new heights, and his self-sabotage seems almost erratic. For instance, at the 19th Party Congress in October 1952, the first Congress in 13 years, mind you, he dissolves a 10-member Politburo and creates a 25-member Presidium, deliberately destabilizing the power structure of the USSR, as Vyacheslav Molotov, former Soviet foreign minister, recalls in his memoirs. He wanted to keep us all off balance. No one felt safe. That's because Stalin trusts no one, even his closest allies, like when he accuses Kliment Voroshilov, one of the top Soviet marshals and a close friend, and Anastas Mikoyan, a faithful high-level Soviet statesman, of being American spies. Then, in January 1953, an unusual headline appears in the newspaper Pravda. There, a group of Jewish doctors are linked to an imaginary international Jewish conspiracy, supposedly directly guided by American spy networks, that now stands accused of plotting to assassinate Soviet leaders and high-ranking military officials. A significant portion of the article criticizes the security and intelligence services for procrastination, placing the responsibility for these threats squarely on their shoulders, with Lavrenti Beria, the head of the Soviet secret police, positioned at center stage of failure. That, mind you, is no coincidence. Beria is the bullseye of Stalin's paranoid machinations. As a result, Stalin orders the creation of a Ministry of Security, appointing Viktor Abakumov as its head. Abakumov's task is simple: track Beria's activities, interrogate the Jewish doctors, and extract confessions from them. What Stalin doesn't realize, however, is that Abakumov is firmly under Beria's influence, with him receiving no information unless the Soviet spy master permits it. However, there is someone who knows about this hidden connection very well: Nikita Khrushchev, the first secretary of the Communist Party of the Ukrainian SSR. Khrushchev informs Stalin about this secret alliance, and the chief Soviet grows furious. He fires Abakumov and replaces him with Semyon Ignatiev, warning him, "If you fail to get real confessions from these doctors, I'll shorten your height by a head and a neck." Driven by fear, understandably, Ignatiev and his forces launch a wave of massive arrests targeting highly respected doctors across the Soviet Union. Many of them perish under brutal torture. He also writes about the tension between Stalin and Beria. Stalin gradually came to realize that Beria had the power to eliminate anyone he wished with a mere gesture, without any obstacles or resistance. Therefore, he could make anyone disappear at will, and it was quite possible that Stalin himself could one day become the target. He knew that Beria was not bound by any moral principles in pursuit of his goals and ambition. Despite this, as far as we can gather, Stalin never openly shares his concerns about Beria. He does, however, make it clear between the lines, like when one evening at dinner, he turns to Beria angrily and says, "Why am I surrounded by so many Georgians?" Stalin is referring to his servants and staff here. What is noteworthy about this observation is that both Stalin and, crucially, Beria are of Georgian descent. According to Nikita Khrushchev memoirs, Beria immediately rushes to their defense. "Comrade, these are all your close associates and like-minded people." Stalin, in his usual cold tone, replies, "So, are you trying to say that Russians aren't loyal to me? That Russians aren't like-minded?" Beria clarifies, "That's not what I meant. I meant that those who have been chosen to serve you are all loyal and sincere." Stalin retorts, "I don't want loyal servants. Replace them." Beria says nothing more, and the next day, most of the Georgian staff are replaced with Russians. Yet, Beria remains one of the very few people who are present at Stalin's private meetings. Stalin doesn't like to be alone during the nights, and he doesn't like sleeping during them either. Instead, he prefers drinking until the morning, to then sleep until noon. To pass the time, Stalin often gathers officials and friends for movie nights, preferably American westerns, or he hosts small parties, and if he's feeling very jolly, he turns on the music and makes everybody dance. Khrushchev remarks, "Before Stalin became suspicious of Mikoyan and Molotov, those two were the best dancers among us. Compared to them, I looked like a cow trying to run on a thick piece of ice." These last weeks of Stalin's life are lived beyond the public eye, inside his close circle of not-so-trusted friends, like his daughter and Nikita Khrushchev. It is only their admittedly subjective accounts that we have to paint the picture. Now, Stalin suspects everyone and everything. For instance, he treats dinner salads and main courses like a minefield. He won't touch them until someone else makes it out alive. On the night of February 28th, 1953, Khrushchev receives his daily call from Stalin, who invites him over for dinner. Malenkov, the deputy chairman of the Council of Ministers, Bulganin, the former Minister of Defense, and Beria are also invited. First, as usual, they go to the Kremlin cinema. Then they head to Stalin's private villa for dinner. And like so many times before, it lasts until around 5 a.m. Stalin seems pretty healthy the whole night. The next evening, Khrushchev anxiously sits by the telephone, not eating because he waits for a call that never comes. Maybe he even thinks, have I fallen out of favor? Am I the next victim of a paranoid despot? Eventually, Khrushchev eats a little, and as he reckons the call will not come, he goes to sleep. Yet a few minutes later, the phone rings. It's Malenkov, demanding his presence immediately. Stalin has fallen to the ground and is unconscious. Now is where it gets tricky. Khrushchev swears that when he reaches the highest Soviet, Stalin's body is cold and his breaths are very shallow. Whether out of fear or incompetence, they decide to put him back to bed, letting him rest. No doctors are called until late at night either. Moreover, given the recent lies and torture unleashed on their profession, it proves tricky to find any doctor willing to risk offering a helping hand. Meanwhile, Stalin keeps fading in and out of consciousness, suffering what seems to be a long and painful death. Both Khrushchev and Voroshilov describe Beria as very elated and jumping around, only to stop his antics right when Stalin awakens yet again. The scramble doctors believe it's a brain hemorrhage. His daughter, Svetlana Alyuyevna, will later say, "God only gives a peaceful death to the good people. My father had a very painful death." The chaos, the atmosphere of intrigue, and the tight-knit circle around the dying dictator leave the actual circumstances of his death somewhat opaque. opacity that will lend itself to a number of conspiracy theories in future years. Like Abdurrahman Avtorkhanov, a prominent Soviet historian, who will claim it was a plot by Khrushchev, Bulganin, Malenkov and Beria, who supposedly poisoned the autocrat. Or like Bertram D. Wolfe, who writes that Tretyakov, Stalin's Minister of Health and his personal doctor, disappears right after the fateful evening. Also suspiciously, General Poskorobyshev, one of the people helping Stalin choosing names for his purges, and importantly, one of Beria's enemies, also disappears in those days. In the end, as so often in history, what really happened is lost to the mists of time. Most historians argue that Stalin had a natural death. However, there are also sufficient diverging accounts and plenty of motivation to cast just a shadow of doubt over the dominant narrative. All this is a very convoluted way of saying we don't know exactly, but by Occam's razor, we should conclude that the simplest answer to a complex problem is correct. He died of natural causes. A conclusion supported heavily by Stalin's continued self-destructive lifestyle at the ripe old age of 74. Whatever the reason for his demise, Stalin's death exposes the fragility he has imbued into the Soviet political system by heavily centralizing it around his person. Stalin's legacy is a power vacuum, various factions now vying for control. Chief amongst which are the Big Four: Beria, Khrushchev, Malenkov and Bulganin. They revive the newly dissolved Politburo and make some changes. Malenkov becomes the general secretary of the state. Beria merges the Ministry of the Interior and the Ministry of Security with, of course, him himself at the helm. Molotov becomes the foreign minister again, and Bulganin now serves as Minister of Defense again, replacing Stalin's ally and one of the famous Soviet generals, Alexander Vasilevsky. Now, it seems like the only one who received nothing is Khrushchev. Well, no, because only a few days after, Malenkov suddenly resigns from his post and Khrushchev replaces him. He is now the general secretary of the largest country on Earth. But this is just the beginning. Since 1938, Khrushchev has played a central role. He was first secretary of the Communist Party of the Ukrainian SSR, then a member of the Politburo, and Stalin's first counsel in agriculture policies. Now, holding the most power he ever has, Khrushchev faces many new rivals, Beria being enemy number one. Not that personal power is the only thing on his agenda. When Stalin was on his deathbed, I wasn't just crying for him. I was deeply concerned about the future of the party and the country. I could clearly sense that Beria would gradually place himself in a superior position over the others, and this would be the beginning of the end for all of us. I knew him well. He was a treacherous, immoral, heartless, and opportunistic man who would stop at nothing, including committing crimes, to achieve his goals. I never considered him a communist. He was a butcher and a professional criminal. And it does not take long for Beria to prove Khrushchev's allegations. He floods the streets of Moscow with security forces. He constantly disrupts the state and party apparatus with random checks and interrogations. He even murders some of his opponents. Perhaps ironically, it is this very behavior that draws Malenkov, Mikoyan, and Bulganin closer to Khrushchev. The wolves slowly circling Beria grow in number and bolder with it. Soon the pack agrees Beria must go. To achieve this, they plan a fake meeting at the Kremlin, a trap to arrest Beria and put him on trial. However, there is a big problem. Nearly all the security forces at the Kremlin, or in Moscow, heck, even across the entire USSR, take their orders directly from Beria, and they aren't likely to simply stand by and watch their leader get arrested. And that's where Bulganin steps in with a bold plan. He proposes a strategy that involves not only political leaders, but also military generals. he recruits 11 high-ranking military officials who despise Beria. Among those, there stands the greatest marshal of the Soviet Union, the indomitable sword of the motherland, and hero of the Soviet Union 4 times over, bearer of the Order of Victory, the architect of Stalingrad and the liberator of Leningrad, the man who drove back Hitler's armies from the gates of Moscow to the ruins of Berlin, and who rode through the shattered capital as living symbol of Soviet triumph, Georgy Zhukov. The plan is simple. The party officials will head to the Kremlin for a meeting, waiting until Beria sits on a chair closest to the door. Then, soldiers, led by Zhukov himself, will burst into the meeting right through the door by Beria's side to arrest him. They manage to maintain secrecy, and everything is set to begin on June 26, 1953. On that fateful day, everything goes according to plan. Everybody in their assigned place. Malenkov chairs the meeting, and right as he wants to introduce today's topic, Khrushchev interrupts him. "Comrade Malenkov, it's better to get to the point and discuss the matter with Beria." Hearing this, Beria, sitting near Khrushchev, is taken aback and asks in surprise, "Nikita, what did you just say?" Khrushchev calmly responds, "You'll understand the matter now." When Malenkov gives Khrushchev the floor, he begins reading Beria's record aloud. He recounts Beria's past, from his time as an agent of the Turkish Equality Organization and even as a British spy in Baku, to the betrayal he carried out during Stalin's reign and even after Stalin's death. After he's finished, Khrushchev then accuses Beria of being involved in a conspiracy against the party and the Soviet government, of high treason. He emphasizes that Beria is not a true communist and only joined the party for selfish reasons and to further his own agenda. Khrushchev ends on a somber warning. If Beria is not stopped, all the achievements of the Bolshevik Revolution will be lost. He also offers a simple solution. He suggests that, due to Beria's myriad offenses and crimes against citizens and the state, Beria should be removed from his post, the party, and subjected to legal prosecution. Mikoyan is the only one who disagrees, meekly suggesting that Beria should be given a second chance. Khrushchev then demands Malenkov put the proposal to a vote. However, Malenkov presses the red button in front of him without calling for a vote, and at that signal, Marshal Zhukov and his soldiers barge into the meeting room. In front of the many stunned members who have absolutely no idea of what's happening, Malenkov turns to Marshal Zhukov and declares, "As the chairman of the Council of Ministers of the Soviet Union, I ask you to arrest Beria so the necessary investigation into the charges against him can begin." Zhukov immediately draws his weapon and orders, "Hands up!" Beria moves his hand towards his briefcase, but Khrushchev grabs his arm. Realizing resistance is futile, Beria surrenders. He's then taken to court, and Roman Rudenko, the Soviet judge from the Nuremberg trials, oversees the interrogation and trial of Beria and his accomplices. During the investigation, in addition to uncovering the crimes and atrocities Beria has committed, other heinous actions come to light. In Beria's case, the man who once sentenced thousands of people to the very fate he now faces, the tried and tested Soviet method of mock trials with predetermined outcomes is unnecessary. Beria already has plenty of skeletons in his closet. There is no need to fabricate any additional ones. Murder, torture, corruption, the sexual assault of nearly 100 women and underage girls, and the list goes on and on and on. In the end, in December 1953, Lavrenti Beria and 6 of his loyal officials are executed. With the removal, arrest, and execution of Beria, Khrushchev has eliminated the most significant obstacle on his path to power. His authority now grows. Alongside this victory, Khrushchev expands the role of the party secretariat in the Soviet Union further, consolidating his own position. At the same time, he gains greater fame and prestige through his initiative in reforming Soviet agriculture, which faces a crisis shortly before and around Stalin's death. Based on his proposals, agricultural taxes on privately held plots within collective farms are reduced, and the purchase price of agricultural products increases. As a result, starting in 1954, agricultural production rises rapidly. For instance, grain production, which does not exceed 80 million tons in 1953, reaches 136 million tons just 5 years later. Meat production increases from 6 to 8 million tons. Sugar beet production doubles, and milk production rises by 60%. Another major event in the Soviet Union during this 1953-1954 time, in which Khrushchev plays a key role, is the deep purge of the Soviet security apparatus, including the dismissal, arrest, and even exile of many former Soviet officials. In early 1954, the Soviet Security Organization is changed in turn and renamed the Committee for State Security, known by its Russian abbreviation KGB. The new security agency, crucially, no longer has its former power, and especially cannot arbitrarily arrest members of the Communist Party. The prosecution of party members without the knowledge and approval of party authorities becomes forbidden, a change that enhances the power and prestige of party officials and, in turn, boosts Khrushchev's popularity. If you remember, we spoke about the Big Four, one of whom, Beria, is executed. But what happens to the others? Well, the hidden rivalry and tension between Khrushchev and Malenkov begin in early 1954 over party and government issues and intensify toward the end of that year due to Malenkov's opposition to Khrushchev's agricultural policies. In fact, Khrushchev never held a favorable opinion of Malenkov and merely used him as an ally to remove Beria. Once Beria is executed, Khrushchev sees no need to maintain his tactical alliance with Malenkov and gradually begins to oppose him openly. Malenkov, sensing a growing threat from Khrushchev, stands his ground. In early 1955, Khrushchev publicly accuses Malenkov of sabotaging his agricultural programs. With careful preparation, he brings the issue to the rest of the Politburo. Finding himself in the minority and not wanting to be accused of betraying the party, Malenkov admits to mistakes in his agricultural policy and to a lack of sufficient experience in government affairs. He then voluntarily resigns from his position as prime minister. The Politburo appoints Marshal Bulganin, Khrushchev's most trusted ally and the third member of the Big Four, as his replacement. Malenkov, having saved himself from a purge by confession, is given the token post of Minister of Power Stations in the new government. Thus, a new leader rises to power in one of the world's two dominant superpowers. A man with a worldview markedly different from his predecessor, and during an emerging Cold War that sunders the world into two blocks. The stakes have never been higher. What happens next? Will Khrushchev try to use the, in his own words, perceived naivete and weakness of US President Dwight Eisenhower? Or will the former allies, the US and the USSR, now locked in the icy grip of a new conflict, find a way to ease tension and avoid catastrophe? Or is the rivalry far deeper, far more dangerous than a mere shift in leadership could ever hope to resolve? Because all of this personal strife is happening against the backdrop of an ever-accelerating nuclear arms race that will soon leave both superpowers in a position to catapult the entire planet into a state of desolation at the press of a button. So this is the most chilling question of all. In a world where such personal animosities dictate the future of the atomic superpowers, could the Cold War turn into superheated nuclear Armageddon, an accidental byproduct of the power machinations of the Soviet elite? An internal imbalance of power set further under duress by firm US determination to oppose Moscow at every turn. Well, since you and I, and both of the guys with me in the studio, aren't irradiated dust, we already know the answer. However, to find out how close we got to this worst case scenario, and it's a lot closer than you might think, check out our Cuban Missile Crisis series right here. on the channel. To become part of the mission, head over to timeghost.tv or patreon.com. Excelsior!